and thank you for joining today's commercial seminar. The topic is development timeline. I am Jenny Ching. I'm a commercial director at the KW Commercial and also your 2021 Education Committee co-chair from the West San Gabriel Valley's Realtors. A friendly reminder, all participants will be muted in the meeting, and should you have any questions, please enter it into the chat box. The speaker will answer your questions during the Q&A session. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on our West San Gabriel Valley Realtors YouTube channel later on. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker, Mr. Vincent Zou. Vincent Zou is a distinguished developer, builder, and entrepreneur. Vincent has worked in multiple sectors of the real estate industry, ranging from residential and commercial development, brokerage, land entitlement to project management and the financing. Prior to Signature Builder, Vincent spent 5 years in the finance sector as vice president at the Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, managing RMBS and CMBS trading portfolios over 500 million USD. Vincent received his bachelor's degree from Cornell University in electrical and computer engineering with a double major in finance and economy. He has served as a board director for the San Gabriel Valley Chamber of Commerce and the Cornell Asian Alumni Association. Without further ado, let's welcome Vincent.
Hey guys, good morning everybody. We have 63 participants. That's quite a nice turnout on a Tuesday morning, and everybody's coming back on the holidays. I hope everybody had a good New Year and good Christmas. So now that is behind us, time to pretty much get back to work, right? So today, I want to talk about, in general, what are the steps and timelines to develop a piece of land from raw land, meaning there's no entitlement, just the dirt sitting there. We don't know what to build on it, how to build it. City doesn't have any recommendations on what to build it. So, if you have a buyer, I know most of the people today here are brokers or agents. So likely that you guys will have a buyer interested in a piece of land. Say, hey, look, I want to develop something. I want to build 10 houses. I want to build 100 houses. I want to build a warehouse. I want to build an office building, whatever they're trying to build. And coming to you, say, hey, how long does it take for the city to approve me to build what I'm trying to build? Right? I got asked that question quite a lot, all the time actually. People say, hey, look, I'm buying this piece of land. How long does it take from now to construction, right? And then how long does it take to build the thing, and how long does it take to sell the end product? So today we're going to focus on everything prior to construction, okay? Going from raw land to an entitled land, okay? So that is the goal today. We're going to try to keep this within an hour. We'll see how the flow goes, and then at the end of the seminar, we're going to have opportunities for Q&As. Any questions that you guys have, and we'll have my information if you guys need any kind of additional knowledge or anything like that. Feel free to email me or to email the board. We'll make sure there's a platform for any kind of question and knowledge exchange going forward. So without further ado, let's start this discussion. Okay, so raw land by definition is a piece of land that pretty much has no design on what to it. It can be a large piece of land somewhere in Riverside, 200 acres, or it can be a small piece of land, half an acre in, let's say, the city of Los Angeles, between two residential commercial buildings, anything without a plan, right? So that is called a raw land. Now, the first thing that you want to do, if your client is interested into buying a piece of land, is to do some due diligence in it, right? The first thing you should do is ask the seller or ask the city or ask the owner of the current land, say, hey, has there been any entitlement? Entitlement is defined as the process to take a raw land, entitle it to something that the city allow you to build, right? So we're adding value to the land by creating a product on it that is accepted by the city and the general public. So that's called entitlement, right? So you want, before you buy anything, before your money goes out of the pocket, going hard, meaning that's not refundable, you wanted to make sure the land that you're looking at can physically support any potential project that you're thinking of. All right, for example, the land has good soil, okay? You know that through a phase 1 report, right? So when you look at the raw piece of land, the first couple of things you want to do when you're in the due diligence period, when you're evaluating the land, you want to do a phase 1 report. If the seller does not have one already, you want to spend maybe $1,000, $2,000, take about three weeks to do a phase 1 report. What phase 1 report does is do a historical study of that property, of that land, to see what has been on it before, all the way to 60, 50 years prior, okay? Was that a factory that was there and that got torn down? Now it just looked there, right? Was there, in California, you see a lot of farms, cow farms, chicken farms, you see a lot of citrus growers. So what was it before? And that history determines what kind of soil is under that piece of land, whether it has any potential of being polluted. If it used to be a factory or like a car dealership or a car shop, then there might be potential oil penetrations into the land, in which case you have to treat oil before you build a residential or commercial building on it. So that directly increases the cost and the entire duration of your project if you have to go in and treat the native dirt. But if nothing is just a piece of land, maybe somebody grow a couple orange trees on it, maybe there's a small office building on it or a small house on it for the past 100 years, then your phase 1 come back clean, right? Okay, so that will be a phase 1 report you wanted to do. The second thing also you want to do right away is to check with the city, what is the current zoning of the land that you want to buy, okay? I will be typing all this out later on in the Excel sheet, kind of going over, reviewing the process. So, if you're taking notes, that's fine. If not, I will have an Excel sheet with all the steps and all the critical stages that we're going to talk about. So I just want to keep this fluid right now. Okay, so you want to check the zoning. Was that a residential zone? Is that R1, R2, R3? That is the density. R1, usually you can build 1 to 4 houses per acre. R2, maybe 5 to 10. And R3, sometimes 20 plus houses or unit per acre, right? So that will allow you to do an apartment. Let's say if your client wants to buy a piece of land, 2 acres, and he wants to build a 100 unit apartment on it, but the zoning is R1, right? 2 acre multiplied by 4, that's actually 8 single family residential according to R1, most likely in most cities. But he wants to build 100, so that requires a zone change. Then you need to really go to the city, ask for that kind of special permission to see if the city allows it. And that is the whole essence of this development process, of this entitlement, right? Because a piece of land that can only build 8 homes and with the same piece of land that can build 100 homes are going to be worth a lot different, right? So entitlement pretty much is taking a raw land, adding value to it, increasing the price, increasing the value of the land by getting it approved for things either higher density or more costly, more expensive buildings. Okay, so let's kind of quick check what we just talked about. When you're looking at a piece of raw land, first thing you want to do is do some due diligence, right? You want to look at the soil, which through a soil report. You want to look at phase 1, that's also looking at the pollutions. You wanted to check the zone. What is the current zone of the land, which translate into the density that the city allows you to build, right? And the other thing that is as important as the current zoning is what's the general plan, okay? Each city has a general plan. And that general plan means what the city wants to do in that area in particular. So the city has a 5-year, sometimes a 10-year general plan, means what the city wants to take, which direction the city wants to go. Sometimes you see a pretty good street and then the city put a high density development area overlay on it. Even though the current zoning may be R1 or A1 agricultural or industrial, but the city eventually wants to see that street become a walkway or some type of residential business center, then that will be highlighted in the city's general plan. You want to overlay the general plan and the current zoning together to see what is the current zoning and what the city expect to be built around that area, right? So that will be the due diligence, okay? So now, after the due diligence, you guys bought the land. You say, hey, look, everything looks good. Let's start this entitlement process. What do we actually need to do to get the land signed off, and we can have the whole plans to a builder, say, hey, look, go ahead and build that 20-unit apartment. Go ahead and build that office building, okay? So the first step that you want to do is approach the planning department, okay? Throughout the first courses of this, you wanted to be dealing a lot, pretty much mostly with the planning department. Each city has a planning department. Some cities, if they're too small, they outsource the planning department to a private sector. But what the planning department does is they look at your proposal and they check with the city's regulation to see what you're proposing and what the city currently allows, if there's any conflict, right? If there's no conflict, and they also understand the planning board's way of approving projects to see what they're usually can approve and what they cannot approve, right? So they kind of being the middle person between what is allowed to do and what are you trying to do, right? So that will be your line of communication. You check with the planning department by doing something called a pre-application. Okay, it's not an actual application yet at this stage because you wanted to get a feeling of what they allow you before you start drawing things that cost money with the architecture, with the civil engineering. So you have a pre-meeting with the city. The city tells you, hey, this piece of land, we allow you to go 3 stories high, 20 units per acre max, right? Here are some reference documents you can use for setbacks, meaning how far away you have to be from the street, from your neighbors, from your fences. So they lay out all the correct parameters for you to design. You take that information, you go to an architect, okay? The architect will translate that into a design, okay? So like just kind of review that one more time. You go to the planning department, you ask what is allowed to do here based on the current code. By then, hopefully you already have something in mind and what the city kind of tell you to confirm what you're trying to build. Hopefully there's no conflict to it, right? You wanted to build a 40-unit apartment over 2 acres. The city saying you can do 20 units per acre. That's great. You know, you can do 3 stories high, so that's fine. I can go 4, I can go 3. Maybe I can go 2, but that's going to be very, very pushing it, right? That's the parking has to be outside or indoor, how many parking space I have to provide. So the city tells you all that information. You take that to an architect. Architect draw something called a site plan or preliminary site plan. What that is to take all the setbacks, where exactly can you build, what parameter can you build within, how many parkings that they can draw, and how many units over how many stories. Okay, so once you have that site plan, the initial design, you take that back to the city to do a pre-application, okay? You'll provide a site plan, you'll provide the elevation, you'll provide the floor plans, okay? This is a very rough thing. So far, I'm not involving MEP, I'm not involving civil, too much of civil. I'm not checking with all the other city departments. I just wanted to see conceptually what I'm trying to build, work with the city or does not work with the city. So let me share a screen of what that pre-application kind of looks like. We will, so that way it will be a lot easier to understand. Give me one quick second, let me just put something up. Let's share this. Okay, this is 52 unit in Merino Valley. Okay, it was a really flat piece of land. Now, what you see here is a site plan, pretty much lay out the parameter of the property, where the entrances are, where the houses and the units are, and there's little community center. Okay, so when you first do a site plan, most of the site plans are drawn by architect. It doesn't have to be this detailed, but it does need to kind of theoretically show where the houses are, right? You have to make sure the setbacks from the properties and all the required open areas can fit what the city's minimum requirement is. And then if you scroll down, you will have a floor plan. It's a very rough floor plans. And then you will also have elevations, meaning what does the house look like from the outside, from different directions, right? This is a side view, that's the front view and the back view. And a lot of time, you want to show what are the entrances, where the street looks like, you know, what kind of fences looks like, what a neighbor's parameter, what a neighbor setbacks looks like. So this file, I have 10 pages. Okay, it's not a lot of pages, mostly highlighting what the area looks like and what your layout is. Okay, so that is pretty much a tentative track map, a site plan. Okay, so coming back. So now you have a site plan, you send in the pre-app, the city look at it, say, hey, look, this is pretty much in line with what the city allows you to do. Now, then what you do next is you involve a lot more consultant engineers and you go for an actual application. Okay, so now you're really starting the entitlement process. So the entitlement process and this actually do not differ too much. Okay, your pre-app and your application actually don't differ that much. So what you do is you go back to the drawings that you have, you polish it up, right? You hire a civil engineer to pretty much look at a drainage. You have to have pretty much a preliminary grading plan. Where the land sit, was it high or low? What is the balance? Very preliminary. We're not getting into the actual construction drawing yet, right? That's the majority of the design piece. But now you wanted to check different departments. Okay, so when you submitted this, you will also be checking with different departments. You wanted to check with the sewage department, water department, fire department, flood control department, right? You wanted to also check with the cities if this land triggers a CEQA, which is the environmental study, whether there's you're close to a highway or a big street, whether there's any kind of requirement for noise, any kind of Indian tribe preservation kind of requirement, right? So you hire all the consultants. Sometimes you have to do a noise study. Sometimes you have to do a traffic study. What kind of cars, how many cars are coming in? What is the impact of what you're trying to build creates on the surrounding environment, right? The city will ask you for a pretty much negative CEQA, a density study of the area, whether your traffic increase will impact the neighborhood. So that's through a traffic study. The city will kind of say, well, do we have any low income requirement? If you're building 20, 30, 40 units, does the city require you to dedicate a portion of it to a low income buyer or renter diversity kind of thing, right? You want to get a well-served letter from at least four departments. Well-served letter is a letter from a department telling you they will serve the project as it is currently designed, right? So if you're trying to design 40-unit project, the fire department say, we have the capability of providing fire trucks and fire rescue for the 40 unit. The water department will give you a well-served letter saying, we have enough water there to supply to those 40 units. Sanitation department, the storage department say, we have enough to take all the wastewater away from that site. Flood department say that is not creating any additional flood to the neighborhood. So you have all of those put together, you send it in. Okay, the city is going to review it. This whole process, this whole first review process probably take the longest. You're probably looking at somewhere between 2.5 months to 4 months, sometimes even longer, for the city to collect all the information and double check every single department to make sure that the city can recommend what you're trying to build to the city council. The planning department can recommend it to the planning council, and then eventually to the city council. Okay, so the staff of the planning department, usually planning department director, will have a staff working for him looking at your project. That'll be your go-to person. He will check your CEQA requirement, your density requirement, your setback requirement, get information from the public work, from engineering department, from building and safety department, right? Check with the fire department, really look at this project as a whole, and then say, hey, look, if everything fits all the criteria, nothing is outside the border, everything is within the scope that the city has approved based on a project like this, then the city will call for a planning department hearing. Okay, so that will be the first public hearing that you guys will have to go to. Is the public hearing with the planning director, the planning directors, and the the planning council members. Okay, the planners. At that meeting, the planning department will do a staff report on your project, and hopefully they're going to say, we recommend this project, we put a green light to this project, and they're asking for the planning directors and the planning council to approve the project. Okay, now that is a public hearing, so the timing on that, usually you have to do a notice to the public, and then planning department usually have a meeting every month, or sometime a meeting every 2 months, and then you have to wait for the next available meeting. So the waiting and the public hearing and the notification usually take about 2 months, okay, to get that done. I will, by the way, one more time, I will have all the timelines and what to check later on when we do a review, and then, so we'll talk about what are the steps and what are the timeline with it. So right now, I kind of just want to keep this as a conversation. So trying to grab as much as you can. I know it's a lot of information for people who have never done entitlement. It's quite a lot, and there's all those little things, but I will kind of break it down a bit later. Okay, so now you submitted the application to the planning department. The planning department reviewed it, cross-checked everything, recommends it. You go to a planning department public hearing. Okay, now five planning council members sit there, look at you present the thing. A lot of them for the first time, right? They don't know this project. Sometimes they might have heard it from the planning department. You might have talked to them, you have a relationship, you check with them before, but most of the time they never heard of this project. They know there's a piece of land. They don't know what you're trying to do with it, right? You do a good presentation and they say, oh, you know what? I like it, but maybe the elevation can be a little bit more different. Maybe we need to provide a little bit more low income to the surrounding areas. Maybe, is the traffic going to be a concern? Is the height going to be too much? Are there any neighbor that have objections to your project? So that is the time when you find out all the human factors. Okay, everything you did before was pretty much by the book, right? Whatever the code is required. Now, all the human factor comes in. Okay, the planning council members are not engineers. They're not sufficient in the field of development. Regular people. Sometimes they can be a nurse. Sometimes they can be a school teacher, right? It's whoever appointed by the city council member. They look at it. Hopefully you don't have a lot of feedback. Sometimes you have feedbacks that are not even reasonable. 50% low income. Well, that's going to kill the project. Not going to do that. So you take that feedback, you go back, you consolidate to see if anything you need to change, right? Sometimes by code you're allowed, but the city council member asked for a couple of things and you wanted to please them, you want to make sure it does not raise out eyebrow or too much objections, you change your design to a point where you think it's going to pass planning, right? Then you resubmit it and have the planning formally approve your project. Okay, now once the planning council approves it, the next step is to schedule a city council meeting. What that is the 5 elected city council member look at your project. By then, you would have planning department recommendation. You would have planning council member approval. Now the final approval is for the city council member. Okay, the city council member is going to do the same thing. It's going to ask random questions, sometimes project related, sometimes whatever they think is the best for the city, for that community, right? Hopefully they approve it, they will sign off on it, and then the city manager will formally sign off your project being approved by planning, being approved by the planning council members, being approved by the city council members, signed off by the city manager. Now, at that stage, you're guaranteed to be allowed to build whatever you have proposed. Okay, that is called a tentative track map. Okay, it's called tentative because it still has not been designed for all of the engineering, the building plans yet. But the city signed off on it saying within 2 years, there's always an expiration date on it. You can extend it when you get too close to it most of the time. But the city saying, we allow you to build what you have proposed. That will be pretty much the end of your stage 1 entitlement. Okay, most of the land or most of the project, after you got the tentative map approved, it will be called entitled. Okay, your land is entitled to build the project that you proposed. Okay, that is a victory to celebrate. A lot of the people, you'll see a lot of land flippers, developers, they will buy a raw land, do everything I just said, right? Check the physical readiness of the land, check with the city, do some design, send it to the city for all those approval. And once they got the tentative map, they sell the land as an entitled land, right? Sometimes you buy the land for $1 million. Once it's entitled, you know how much you can get. You sell it for 4, you sell it for 5. So there's a big value increase from raw land to entitled land, okay? That is pretty much, the entitlement is pretty much the most value added portion to the raw land because it takes all the uncertainty out, right? When you have a piece of raw land, you don't know what to build. You don't know what can be built. You don't know what's allowed to build or not allowed to build. Sometimes the zoning is R1, but really the best product here, or the only product that makes sense here, is R3, right? So you just, sometimes by code, the city only allow you to build 5 homes. But if it's in LA area or higher density area, the best use for the land is really to build 40 apartments, right? So taking a land that is only allowed to build 5 homes and entitle it to have the city allow you to build 40 apartments, that is the entitlement process. And that is adding value to the land because now the land is more freed up. You can build more than what is just a 5 unit, right? That's where the money appreciation, you buy the land for a cheap price and then after entitlement you sell it. There's nothing done to the land. The land is still the land, right? But entitlement is different now. So the land is worth more money. So a lot of your client, if they're looking at a project, they will say, well, let's buy raw land through entitlement because the raw land is cheaper. Yes, that's correct. But then your entitlement process take a long time. And there is risks that you have with this entitlement process. Let's say you client bought a piece of raw land that's allowed you to build 5 units. Okay, he probably paid some money for it. Now, if the city does not allow you to build more than 20 units, then you're actually losing money. Let's say the math, that's how the math works out, right? I need to build more than 20 units to justify the price that I paid for that land. Great, so you hit that 20 mark. But if you're able to hit 40, then the land almost double in price or whatever the number is. So a lot of people will ask you, say, well, let's buy a piece of raw land, but how long does it take for me to get entitled? And that is pretty much everything I kind of talked about earlier. So let's review this really quick, and I'm going to put up an Excel sheet, and to see, we can write it down. And let me see, there's a couple of messages going around. Let me see if there are any Q&A so far. No, I think mostly just praising Pauline for hosting this seminar. So, all right, so let's get that started. Let me share my screen. Okay. So let's call this development timeline process, right? Let's start. With this, and let's call this. Let's call the stage, okay? And this duration. Okay, raw land, there's nothing, zero. You start with that, okay? The first thing you want to do is do due diligence, right? That is before you even bought the land, okay? Usually people will give you about 90 days. So I'll say 3 months. Duration, I'm gonna use month. Okay, so you have usually 3 months to do your due diligence, okay? Now, what does that include? Due diligence, you want to check the phase 1 report, okay? You want to check the soil report if you can. You want to check the zoning. One and assumes one. Density. Okay, those are very important things to check. I'm gonna put that in here. Okay, those are things that you want to check during your due diligence, along with all your other broker-related due diligence studies. How much the final product can sell for, right? And all that stuff. At the same time, you might want to check city and school fees that is associated with this kind of development, right? How much do we need to pay for the city? How much do we need to pay for the school? How much do we need to pay for the water board for fees once the project's been built? So you want to do all of that due diligence. And I'm assuming that is 3 months, okay? So you use 3 months to do all your due diligence. Okay, now once you pass the due diligence, what you want to do is a pre-app. Okay, during your pre-application, you want to draw up site plan, elevation, and floor plan. And maybe you do a grading and landscape design. I'll say rough design. Okay, so those are things that you wanted to kind of draw up. This whole pre-application process, your site plan, elevation, floor plan, and all those designs, just the design itself, you're probably looking at about 2 month period. And for the pre-application to turn around, you're probably looking at about another month. So I'll say this is another 3 months. Okay, so you have another 3 months. Okay, so now your pre-application came back, the planning department said, hey, look, we like what you're proposing, right? Let's do it for real. Let's submit an actual application. So now this, I'm gonna move those down. That's eventually where we're trying to get to. Okay, there's a lot more stages there. So raw land, due diligence, pre-application. Okay, now this is the actual application you're submitting. And what that is going to require is a sequence study, potentially. The city is going to check setbacks. You want to get will serve letter from, let's see, how do I write this? From, I'll just write it. From fire, water, sanitation, and flood. Okay, so you want to get, okay, so will serve letter. You also want to check with public work, check with engineering, check with landscaping. Okay, those are the departments that you want to check with. Any low income, see if there's anything else. So that is the whole application. So the design, I'm gonna add one more column here is hire consultant. What consultants are required at this stage? I'm gonna highlight it. You're gonna need an archi, you're gonna need a civil. Potentially, you're going to need a noise, we'll put this out, potentially need a landscaping. Those are the major consultants that you need to hire, and any noise report, noise study, traffic study. Okay. So all of those are required for the application to be deemed complete. Okay. Each city different. Some city does not require noise study. Some city does not want to see a landscaping design, right? Some city cares, some city doesn't. So this whole process, your design process, your collecting information process, probably take about at least 2 to 3 months. And for the city to have feedback, usually they give you feedback, you redesign something, you submit it in, and they change it, they give another feedback. You're probably looking at about a good 5-month process right here, if not more. Okay, it's always good to put in a little bit more. So another 5-month process. Sometimes you can combine the pre-application and the application process together. Okay, depends on how comfortable you are, how much you have worked with the city before. And then once you have this application, then the next thing to go to is planning approval. Now this is public hearing, notification, okay? This usually take about 2 months. To notify them, you need to give, each city is different. You need to give them 15 to 30-day notice before the public hearing can be conducted. And then you have to see when the next public hearing is. So you merge the 2 months here. And then if the planning approves it, then you have city council approval. And that is the same thing as public notification and public hearing. That is also another 2 months. Right? Same thing, notification to your neighbors, all the city people from the city. Now, what might happen between those, I'm just going to add one more buffer in here, revision to plan. Okay, so you're going to hear some feedbacks from planning department, and then you have to do a revision. I'm going to put a 1 month in here, just as a buffer, okay? Usually you don't have to do much revision after the city council approval, because city council, this is mostly a formality, city council approval. Your real actual work and all the technical stuff is done under this section, application, right? This is where they check all the feasibilities, all the actual design, preliminary design. Planning approval, kind of formality, you come in with the human factor, what the planning council members want to see on this track. And then once planning recommends it, the city council usually do not vary too much. They don't try to push it back and make a redesign. It's just too much work. So usually if you clear the planning approval, most likely you're just going a formality and cruising through the city council approval. So now with that, and you have city manager sign off. Look at that. That will be your victory stage. That usually doesn't take that long. This actually happens pretty much right after that. Sometimes you can take a month, depends on the schedule and whether the lawyer has to check it. So total.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Vincent, would you be able to enlarge your screen
Oh,
or
yes.
use a larger font size?
Give me 1 second. Let me do that.
Thank you.
Does this help?
Perfect.
Okay, 16 months. So this is what we pretty much have right now. Okay, now this is assuming everything is going pretty smooth. Okay, I know a lot of you guys heard, hey, taking a raw land to a piece of land to an entitlement, how long does it take? And there are people say, well, in California, it takes 2 years, sometimes it takes 3 years. And some people are very optimistic, say, oh, it'll take a little bit more, a year or something. What I kind of go over is a very regular process with very little hiccups, right? Raw land, everything checks out here in due diligence, right? Everything kind of gets designed and the city likes it through this application. You have all the consultant came out with nothing that particular raise a flag, nothing, there's really no in-depth discussion with the planning department or the engineering or the public work department. Everything is kind of saying, hey, yeah, you're good to go. We can support you. But if there's any kind of hiccup, there's any boundary issues, vague boundaries, or any kind of a design capacity issues, then you are going to dramatically increase this application stage. That's what I'm saying. From 5, I have seen things that does not get done after 10 months. Okay, let's do a very kind of, let's do a scenario in case something goes wrong. It doesn't have to everything goes wrong in the same stage, okay? So number 1, due diligence, hopefully nothing goes wrong. Pre-application, hopefully nothing really goes wrong, right? Now application, let's say your CEQA come back, you need to do some mitigation. That is a 2-month addition to it. Right? You check with public work saying, well, we don't actually know the capacity. You need to do a fire flow test. You need to do a capacity test. And when you go traffic, the traffic say, well, we need to do a traffic count and then send it back to the city. Let's say this is 10 months, double it. A lot of going back and forth. Planning public hearing, 2 months, revision to the plans. The planning also wanted a couple more things done, right? They say, well, your height is too much, your density is a little bit too much. We wanted to see a little less density. All the neighbors come back saying, well, this place is too big. The design is too ugly, or it's blocking my views. You have to change a lot of things. Add another 4 months to this. We'll have to really kind of change the plans and kind of get a kickback to the first stage, right? At this stage, revision to plans, it doesn't get, let's say you do any revision, you pretty much get kicked back to this application stage, right? You have to recheck with everything else, making sure what you redesign fits everything else. So this is really a tedious process, right? So you add a little bit more, city council approval, leave it at, then you have 25 months. That's a 2-year process. So anywhere between, I would say 18 months to 3 years, I have seen all. But usually depends on what you build. If you're building, let me share another screen. Let's kind of go over some examples. So let's say you're building 52 units in Merino Valley, in the area where the neighborhoods are also residential, right? Very similar density. Now this kind of project, I would assume it will take somewhere between a year and a year and a half to entitle to get to the tentative map stage, because you're building anything you're building something that fits into the surrounding area, right? There's really not that much variance that you can have. This is the product for this place, right? You're not really going to build a tall office building. You're not building warehouses or factories because city will just not allow you to do it. So you're building something that fits in. So that would usually be on the faster end. And also because there's, it's not that many units, right? But now let's say, look at this project. This is also one of our projects. We bought Entitled. This is 73 unit in Temple City on Rosemead Boulevard. You're talking about a shopping center in front of it, some office right around it. The current structure is a one-story kind of warehouse, church kind of building. Now you're entitling something 1, 2, 3, 4 stores with commercials on the bottom, residentials on top. It's not a big piece of land, but you're entitling something that is very, very different from its neighborhood. Okay, that will take north of 2 years. Okay, because all of the department have to check everything, whether they have enough capacity, whether that has too much impact to the surrounding areas, right? And also, has the city done something like this? Does the city want a project that draws this much attention? Okay, so those kind of projects will take a lot longer, right? So use your best judgment. If you're building something that is homogeneous to the surrounding areas, maybe you get it done for a year or a little more, right? If you're doing something that's so extraordinary, you're such a kind of visionary, that will take time, right? So let me stop the screen sharing for now and open up for any kind of questions. Let me quickly say this though. Right now we talk about from raw land to tentative map, okay? Now we're talking about over a year, potentially between a year and a half to 2 year process. When you got a tentative map, does not mean you can start construction, okay? There's also another stage, which is the second stage of entitlement, kind of, is the working drawing stage. You have to take all of the elevation, all the floor plans, all the civil site plans that you have drawn, hire the engineering to draw construction drawings, exactly where the pipes sit, exactly how tall the floor plan is, how the mechanical HVAC plumbing, how those are ran, how that connects to the public sewage, where are all the rainwater going to be collected and how it's going to be treated and then eventually flow out into the street or underground, right? So those actually require working drawings from civil engineering, MEP designers, your Title 24 for energy safety, energy efficiencies, architect doing all those drawings. That alone takes about 8 months to complete. Okay, so if you have a raw piece of land and somebody asks you for, say, hey, look, if everything goes decent from when I have a raw piece of land to I can start construction, how long does it take? Okay, if we're talking about a large project or even a medium-sized project, we're not talking about single-family home. That's a totally different entitlement process, which I can talk about in the future. But we're talking about, at least 10 unit, 20 unit apartments, single families in a group, from raw land to actual construction, right? Let's say you take 16 months plus another 8 months, you have 24 months, right? So that's 2 years from the time you bought the land to when you actually start construction. That's a very, very standard and normal time frame here in California, especially in the Los Angeles area, San Bernardino, Orange County area, Riverside area. That's a very, very standard timeline. And that's assuming if you don't really mess up the timing or you don't forget something, you have to backtrack and redo things, right? So I'm gonna leave it like that. And then I'm gonna hand the mic back to Pauline. If there are any questions, there are any kind of things, would you read it out so I can kind of answer anyone's question? And if you have any questions, leave it in the chat section. I'm here for a little bit longer, and I can kind of talk about anything that you guys might have questions. Pauline, back to you.
Yes, so this is Jenny.
Oh, hi, Jenny.
there are some questions.
Mhm.
Let's see. Some of them talk about the YouTube video, which will be available 24 to 48 hours after the seminar. Okay, so there's a question. So what is the estimated cost range of Untitled the raw land? How much a margin you usually add if you plan to sell it?
Usually, let's say if we're trying to entitle a 50 unit, either attached homes or apartment, something like that, to the tentative map stage, your due diligence stage is very, very cheap, right? The most costly thing you might have to do is a phase one report. That probably take you $2,000 something, right? For your due diligence. That's before you commit it on buying the land. Once you buy the land, for the pre-application stage, it also does not take that much. You're probably looking at about somewhere about $10,000 to $20,000, depends on the architect that you hire, to draw up some very preliminary site plan, very preliminary elevations and floor plans. Okay, nothing concrete. You're not trying to get all the details in. You're just trying to have something you can show it to the planning department, say this is like kind of similar to the things that we have in mind, right? So that will probably cost you somewhere around 10,000-ish for the architect to draw something up. Now, then you get into the actual application, which starts to get expensive. The architect needs to dig in a lot more into the design, right? You need to check all the setbacks, all the red lines. Your civil engineer likely needs to come in, get well-served letter, talk to the fire department, water department, sanitation, flood, all of that, right? Landscape engineer might need to come in. So for the actual preparation of the application, and also the city's review fees, the city doesn't do this for free, so they'll charge you to do it. They'll sometimes they charge by hours, and then for anybody that's reviewing it, they might, if it's a third party or whatnot, they might charge their time on reviewing this as well. So I would say, if you're planning to do let's say a 40-unit apartment somewhere in San Gabriel Valley area, Roland Heights, Riverside, San Bernardino area, you're probably looking at about somewhere between $60,000 to $120,000 on the preparation of this application, right? That depends on whether you trigger SEPA or you do not trigger SEPA. You have to do a noise study, you have to do a traffic count, and all of that kind of stuff, right? So I would say I will budget somewhere about $100,000 for the entire entitlement process. Okay, the entitlement process is not, in many ways, it's not the most costly process. The costly part comes in the second stage, which is the working drawing. That's when all the consultant has to actually spend a lot of time creating the drawings, the PDFs, the CAD files, and all of that, and really working with the city engineering department, public works department. In the beginning, all you're doing is pretty much checking the parameters and making sure the city likes your project and they allow you to build a project to design in certain ways. And then how you build it in detail is in the second stage, right? So before tentative stage, I would put in about $100,000 for a regular project, ranging from 20, 30 unit to 100 units sometimes. Once you go into the bigger one, 200 unit, 300 unit, or high rise, mid rises, then things changes a lot. But for anything that is kind of standard, 50 unit, 60 unit, right? Not too extensive. What you got? Too extensive burdens on the neighborhood, right? So you put about $100,000 in there for all the costs, all the engineering costs, and together. So that will probably get you an entitlement. And how much money does that? What kind of margin do you put on to sell it? Very, very different. I do not trying to look at the raw land and then assess a margin and then trying to sell it. The way I try to price things are always very, very different. Though I price the raw land when I'm trying to buy it, I price it exactly what it is. Okay, I do not expect any entitlement afterward. You always want it to be paying a very good price for the raw land. But when I sell it based on what is entitled. Okay, let's say I entitled 20-unit apartment. I always go backward. That was the way. That was my last seminar, right? So you go backward, you see how much you can sell, how much it takes to construct, how much you have to pay for the fees, how much your margin is, right? And then you back out the land price, and whatever that land price is the land price. Sometimes you can pay $1 million for the raw land, but when you back out that land price, you did a good job on entitlement. All of a sudden, that land is worth $10 million. Then your margin is 900%, right? Sometimes you have a raw land and the final product that you created, you backed it out, it's only worth $1.5 million, right? Then you should go, well, then I probably shouldn't even do the entitlement. I'm spending all this time taking the risk. I'm only making 50% over a 2-year period. That's 25% per year, right? So you might as well just do something else. Usually from raw land to entitled land, you're looking at 100, 200%, 300% increase in the value of the raw land. And however long it takes for you to the entitlement, that directly affect your profit margin and how efficient you run things and how much knowledge you have into this industry. Some people can get the same entitlement within a year. Some people, if they don't really know what they're doing, they don't have a good relationship, or they don't have a rapport with the city, then take them 3 years, right? But eventually they're entitled in the same thing. So that comes down to developers' experience, expertise, and all that. Okay, so Jenny, back to you. Let me see what other questions.
Okay. Next one. Based on your experience, which cities are the easiest to work with in terms of meeting requirements and approvals, and which ones are not?
All right, cool. Let me kind of quickly go over a lot of the cities. Let's talk about LA County and LA's, right? That's Rowland Heights, that's Hacienda Heights, and all the LA counties, right? Rowland Heights, Hacienda Heights are unincorporated. So any kind of entitlement, you go to the LA County. To be honest, LA County, LADWP, which is the Department of Water and Power, is a nightmare to work with. And not because the people are bad, right? This is nothing personal against any of the workers that work for any of the cities. This is just the process and how the process differs from each city, right? Some city uses third-party reviewers, consultants. LA County is so big, right? Everybody's busy. They're always short-staffed, and the process is a little bit very different. So LA is kind of very hard to work with. Pomona, based on my experience, is actually quite easy to work with. That's one of the cities that we have a very, very good relationship with. Not anything kind of like doing favors for us, but if you just follow their protocols, they are very responsive, and they get things done pretty quick and by the book. So Pomona is a good city to work with. San Jacinto, Riverside, Eastville, those are also very good cities to work with because they welcome development. And as long as you're doing something that's within their scope, right? You're not going to build a high rise in the residential area, or you're not trying to do a couple of warehouses in the residential area. You're doing residential in the residential area that meets the zoning code and the density code. They will give you a pretty easy time as long as you follow all the procedures, okay? Chino Hills is actually not that bad to work with. We have multiple projects in there right now. Ontario is a little bit hard to work with because their process requires a lot of check. So, sometimes you send in something, they don't necessarily tell you what's missing until you assume that you have everything already approved, and it's, oh, wait a minute, we forget this kind of stuff. One more thing to talk, since we're on this topic, always check your work and don't rely on the city telling you what you're missing, because the city are very busy and they are not responsible to catch all your errors or all your omissions, right? So if you missed the traffic count, and then you think this place needs it, but the city never mentions it, do not think that you're going to get lucky and nobody notices it, because that question will come up sooner or later, right? If you come up during the planning public hearing, that means you have to go back and do it, right? You might as well do all of the things simultaneously and trying to shave off some time right there. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Every city is reasonable. There's a couple cities that are very, very easy to get a tentative map. For example, Ukaipa, very easy to get a tentative map because they don't really check zoning, they don't really check density, they don't really check site plan elevation, they don't need well served letters or any of that. They don't care how you build it. They just pretty much say, well, you want to build, 50 unit right here. It meets the density code. It looks fine. It's same as around the area. Here's a tentative map. But what they did eventually is put all of the work and the due diligence into the second stage, into the working drawing stage, right? They don't require soil report, they don't require phase one report. The city does not care what's there. If you want to build this and the city's saying, well, it's the same as the area, they will let you do it. But then at the second stage, you have to redo all of those sequence, redo all the soil report to make sure what you propose can actually be built. You have to see if you have water, if you have gas, you have electric powers and all that kind of stuff. So, sometimes getting the tentative map, if you're actually a builder, you don't want to be taking the shortcut and putting things to the end. But if you're a land flipper, right, you're just a developer trying to flip the land, sometimes you might want to do that. You want to spend as little money as possible in the beginning, get a tentative map, sell it for a lot more money, and then leave all the headache to the people who bought it. So let me go to the next question, Jenny.
Okay. So the next question is from Arthur Xu. He said, hi, Vincent. I have 20,000 square feet of raw land in Azusa and 2.41 acres raw land in Riverside. Would you be interested in taking a look at it?
Sure, send it to me. Usually, half an acre, what you have is half an acre and two and a half acres, right? What are you trying to entitle? I can give you some advice and, show me we can talk to see what you're trying to do. And then I can kind of maybe guide you or just give you my 2 cents on what I think. Sure.
Okay, Arthur, I think Vincent's contact information is in the chat box in the beginning. Okay, next one from Mr. Lee. I have gone through this process in quotes 2 to 5 years. Timeline is an unpredictable factor. My concerns with some owner developer is that they can run out of money as the more changes occur. More funds are needed. How much % would you add as contingency? The inevitable delay also adds to the pending construction costs. Any thoughts on cost controls? Adding 60K to 100K as buffer can price the unit out of the market. Methods to expedite the entitlement approval. There are a lot of questions here. So
yeah. So Mr. Lee, so the question is this, right? I'm just kind of summarizing and saying, hey, look, sometimes the entitlement can take a long time, right? And that adds cost. If the city required to do a full CEQA, that's almost $100,000 more, right? So that's why you wanted to do this step by step. You want to do your due diligence right. You want to do your pre-applications correctly. You want to do your application correctly, right? So your due diligence set up for your pre-application, your pre-application set up for your application, right? You can actually just jump right into the application and spending all that money hiring other consultant, but then you kind of be going back and forth. While you're trying to save time, you'll be opening up yourself for a lot of potential kind of pitfalls, right? So how much margin would I put on this? Let me just put it this way. For entitlement like this, I do not recommend anybody who does not have an entitlement experience start out with a very, very difficult or large project in 40 to 50 unit without any help from the experts, right? Hire a consulting manager, hire a consultant, right? Hire an entitlement manager or something. Now, anybody who bought the land price and the entitlement price should be proportional. Okay, if you're buying the land for $100,000 and you're spending $100,000 on entitlement, you bought the land really, really cheap, and you can only afford $100,000 to do the entitlement, I really don't think you should be touching that project. okay? Because you need to always have a reserve. Whenever we do land entitlement, the money that we spend on the entitlement should not be such a load factor that make you feel uncomfortable, okay? Uh, because there's a lot of risk with entitlement. Like just like you said, it take 2.5 years. Like easily can go up three. I've seen project take 5 years. Uh, I would at least do $100,000 kind of cash reserve. I don't need to reserve that to that specific project, but I would have a bankroll of at least $100,000 if I'm doing 2, 3, 4 projects at the same time. At least $100,000 to $200,000 that I have as raining day money. Now, profit margin, how is that affected? Yes, if you have a smaller project, let's say you only have 6 units, you have to spend $100,000 on entitlement. That average on 6 units is quite a lot. And compared to you spend the same amount of money or similar amount of money, but you're entitling 100 units at the same time, right? The tentative map state, you're really not going into the details. Your entitlement, regardless of how big or how small, sometimes a 6 unit in a project is even more costly to do than a 100 unit project, right? Depends on the city or something even in the same city, depends on the location and everything else, right? So the entitlement project is really not per unit price. It's a set price, right? And you need to allocate that to each unit because eventually you translate it that way. So I would say if you're gonna do an entitlement project, make sure the money that you're gonna spend kind of makes sense for the number of unit or the size of the project. Okay. So let me see the next question. How about Monrovia? Can you go briefly? CUP process. Monrovia is actually a city that's very standard. They don't really require anything out of the blue. It's a good city to work with. Haven't had problems. There's a lot of newer builders that have been working there, bigger builders. It's very professional. As long as you keep it professional and you don't come in as somebody who doesn't really know what you're doing, then the city will like to work with you. The city will feel that your professionalism, your expertise, knowing that they don't have to. CUP, I'm gonna skip that this time. I want to answer a little more questions. There's quite some questions there. And we're kind of approaching to the 1 o'clock. We're already a little bit over. So I might have another seminar and do a CUP process next time. I have your contact and email to be in touch pretty soon. Here we go. Yeah, I think we're pretty good on time right now. So Jenny and Pauline, I want to give it back to you guys and everybody who's here. We have almost 90 people. I think over a certain period earlier today, there's over 90 participants in this. I hope I'm not boring. I hope I'm not talking too fast and making everybody confused. And I hope you guys all can take away something. If you don't take away anything today, there's a lot of details in it. Just kind of do me a favor, and if you have somebody ask you how long does it take for raw land to entitle it, do say about 1.5 to 2 years, but more on the 2-year end. Okay, so if you don't remember any details, that is one thing to take away from today. Okay, that's a very standard development timeline here in California, in Los Angeles. You're looking at about 2 years to get it. Cool. I appreciate it, everybody.
Okay, so on behalf of the West San Gabriel Valley Realtors, I'd like to thank Vincent again for this informative presentation. So please contact him directly if you have any further questions. And then a quick reminder for our next 2 classes. On January 1st, Tuesday at 10 a.m., we have 2021 landing updates with Cosmo Sanchez. And on January 26th, Tuesday at 10, we have eviction moratorium updates with attorney Dennis Block. So please join us. And thank you very much and see you soon.